There'd been a particular discovery of a massacre that morning in the newspaper, and somebody in the bank asked, "What do you think that's going to do to the price of dollar mark?" Kind of taken this human suffering and reduced it into an opportunity to financially benefit from the shiftings of currencies, because at that time currencies were quite linked to this conflict. It was quite proximate to Europe. And I couldn't believe it. And so I didn't even sit down. I went into my boss's office and I resigned that day. And 2 days later, I was in Pristina. And I went there not really with an idea to photograph. I took a camera with me, but I didn't really know how to use it very well. I just wanted to learn.
They are such powerful words, aren't they? I just wanted to learn. 5 words that are the start of many an adventure or life pivot. You can spend hours thinking that you know your world, the streets that you walk, the places that you feel at home, the little things that bring you comfort, the routine, the familiarity, the rhythm. And then one day, a camera, or indeed a mix of camera, and somebody saying something so magnificently devoid of humanity shifts all of that. And humanity is an important word today, because whilst a lot of my conversation with my guest Marcus Bleasdale is about that, it's also Claire Thomas's one-word assignment with 1 more week to run. We're very lucky to be interested in photography, aren't we? Because it has this alluring, powerful way of being both mirror and door. It reflects your surroundings, your people, your view of things in the world, but then it starts to open. And quietly, maybe at first, granted. And then before you realise it, you're looking far beyond what you thought was that horizon. That is the magic. And that's how it manifested itself for Marcus in this quite extraordinary story, I think, today. There's been a number of photojournalists and documentary guests. Claire Thomas, most recently, who 1 minute have been capturing light through the trees, the quiet stories of their travels or pictures they've been making in their own town, closer to home. When that box in their hands, the humble, not so humble camera, asks much more of you. It pushes you to notice, not just beauty, but imbalance too. And as in this story, the question you ask yourself as a creative, as a photographer, becomes not solely what's out there to photograph, but what needs to be seen, what needs to be learned. That shift, that's when photography moves from being a hobby, a glorious one at that, to a different kind of purpose. You find yourself drawn perhaps to the margins, to the stories that aren't being told. How often do we hear guests of this show say, "I wanted to give voices through my pictures to the people who couldn't outwardly tell their story in any other way." The refugee camps, the mining towns, the front lines of protest, the aftermath of silence. You go as a witness, because sometimes witnessing, that's what people most need. And that comes through many stories that are told on this show. Look, there are degrees of this, obviously, and not everyone will be drawn. In fact, it's probably only a very, very small proportion of people who would want to tell stories and be a witness, like someone as focused in a literal and mental sense as my guest Marcus Bleasdale today. Witnessing is multi-leveled, of course. For instance, last weekend, we had a family meal, whole family, everybody was there. Big meet-up. And, inevitably the question of, why did you choose India, came up as a place that I travelled to with fellow photowalkers. The inference being the fabulous stuff next to the streets that look very different to our own. The inference being that the fabulous stuff that I see as a photographer, that my fellow photowalkers saw as photographers, doesn't perhaps fit into the cookie-cutter way of travelling, if you get my drift, of some of those around the table. And as if by magic, a picture appears that I think most of my family would think, well, why are you choosing to photograph peaked early. Why are you choosing to photograph a boat that's half sunk at the edge of the canal? I don't know why. but it just interests me. ISO 200, f3.2, shutter speed 400th. And there we go. Half-sunken boat by side of canal. So, I think I fumbled somewhat when it came to answering the question of why India. I didn't come up with the answer that really underlined my why. And considering these thoughts now, I think the answer really is also being a witness, a travelling witness. Because being a witness strips away the postcard versions of places, doesn't it? Like walking the streets of India, where life pours out in all its noise and grace. And you realise that understanding how people live actually means being there. You have to be there, be present to really experience it. You can't do that just through looking at YouTube films or looking at pictures online. I wish I'd remember what Marcus said right at the start of the show today. That's what I should have said. I just wanted to learn. And you can't do that unless you're in an immersed sense, can you really? You certainly can't do it by pressing play on a Netflix doco. So yes, photography can transport you. But more than that, it can transform you. Be that in a macro sense or in a far more intense way, as we'll learn through the pictures and stories today of Marcus Bleasdale, who uses photography to expose human rights abuses and the impact of conflict in some of the world's most overlooked places.
Today on the Photowalk.
I don't think it was a very brave thing to do or a very stupid thing to do. I just think it was a decision that, one can take at any stage in life. You would just want to do something different. They wanted to get access to the films that they knew that I'd taken, so I just got out of the country. How do we use natural resources to fund conflict? How do these natural resources that we all use every day, and and I'm not saying don't use them, but I'm just saying be aware of where they come from, but how do we use them? I think the strength of that image is the playfulness and the smile, because you see the child, and yet the contrast of that smile and that playfulness that I see as a parent of my 9-year-old twins now. I see that in them. And this kid wasn't that much older, maybe 11. And yet he was carrying a Kalashnikov. I think about photography a little bit like a novel, right? We need relationships, we need love, we need to be introduced to characters, we need landscapes and senses of place, we need very tight stories around the kitchen table, and we need stories walking down a lane in the farm.
That's Marcus Bleasdale, my guest on the show today, a very special guest. It's the Photowalk, a show where we walk and make pictures, photographically sketchbooking our time together each week, accompanied by the letters and inspirational stories you've sent in, plus talking with special guests from around the world. The mailbag is back, and I'll take a peek into it in a moment for a flavour of today's letters we have. But before that, thank you to those sincerely who believe in the cast enough that you are Patreon members, or extra milers as you're now affectionately known, and to mpb.com, who I'd like to do a special thank you to this week, as it's the last week for a little while in terms of them sponsoring us. 4 years ago, MPB said yes to us when asked to support the show, and have helped us establish to a stage where we are today. And for that, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my photographic heart. MPB are the number one place to go to when it comes to being concentrated on sustainability, which is it's a sub-theme of today's show in many respects. If you want to buy, trade or sell used photo and video gear, then MPB can be trusted to be your partner in the UK, Europe and the US. We've talked much about sustainability on this show across the years, and how important it is in terms of purchasing kit. Your used can so easily be somebody else's brand new. And by using MPB online at mpb.com to buy, sell or trade, you are part of the solution when it comes to thinking green. I've visited the HQ in Brighton. We've done shows from there a number of times across the years doing this show, and the fact that they don't use bubble wrap, they employ people who actually care about making pictures themselves, and they supply guarantees on kits when you buy. They are just some of the reasons I have been so proud to have had an association with them as our lead sponsor. So go to mpb.com to buy, sell and trade used camera and video kit. It's easy to do. You're walked through every part of the process, and I can vouch for that as I use them myself. So thank you, MPB. You are stars. Also this month and next, we're supported by our friends at Lowa Boots, L-O-W-A, of course. And if you need new boots, then you'll be pleased to know that using code Photowalk, all one word, on www.lowa.co.uk, you can receive 25% off the price of boots or shoes up to the end of April 2025. You'll also find the link on the show page. Right, on the show today, Spike in Australialand has sent a film link in which really had me thinking about connection. Jerilyn Owen is learning to accept through making a self-portrait. Samantha Ramsay discovers spirit through photographing hands. Complaints Corner's opened up. Oh no, a case of the wrong pants today. Greg Picone has found a spooky landscape behind his backyard. And Randy Bullerwell has been photographing carnival season in Aruba in a unique way. You have to roll the R's for Aruba. Plus there's this month's one-word assignment. A short reminder as it's the last week. This month is set by Claire Thomas, the photojournalist. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. Have you got spare film or maybe an extra SD card? Check. And a hanky as we wave bye-bye to MPB. I promised myself I wouldn't. Pull yourself together, Neil. Let's walk.
You are such an important part of this show. What you write in with gives our community a real uniqueness. It does. Your thoughts about walking and creativity and photography provides a very welcome respite for the noise of this world right now. As together during this show we put some miles under our feet and make a picture or two along the trails that we take to remind us of where those footprints were left, even if it does mean photographing half-sunken boats at the side of a canal. If you have a picture or a letter to send in and are gently nudged in any way by anything that you hear today, send your stories. I know, pups, I'm just doing the email address to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. Right, letters. Actually, even though the mailbag is back, I'd like to start not with a letter, but with a comment. It's a similar thing, but different, that I spied on the website that came in from one of our very precious extra milers, Spike Boydell in Australialand. It was really in response to Claire Thomas's assignment this month, which is to photograph a picture showing humanity. I will remind you later again when we do the actual bit. I've been a little late, nay tardy, he says, sounding like something from a Dickensian page, in uploading all the pictures that came in for the challenge, the assignment. That in the 2 weeks I was, for 2 weeks I was in India. Were you, Neil? You didn't tell us you were in India. Yes, did I tell you I was in India? Which I think is a fair excuse. Then last week, when I was back, my body said, Neil, you need to slow down. And literally, correct use of the L word, I think, sat me down and wagged a finger at me and shook its head. Like one of those annoying sanctimonious drivers when you made a teensy mistake on the road. I tell you what, those are the sort of drivers that should be given a day in Delhi. A day in Delhi, then they'll understand what tinsy mistakes really mean. It's a totally different style of driving, as you'll hear on the India special. Anyway, Spike's comment accompanied the page on the website where you can see the pictures sent in for Claire's super assignment this month, which is titled Humanity. And on that page, you will see humanity in many forms. And human connection is very much part of the process, as you would expect. Humanity, connection, humanity, very good bed partners. Anyway, from Spike was an invite to watch a YouTube film, which I have popped onto the show page today for episode 476. Knowing what a man of excellent taste and thought Spike is, I did what I was told, while sat down with my body wagging a finger at me, and watched the film with a strong cuppa, and I'm so glad I did. I often nudge you gently or otherwise to go look at the show page and take in the films and the reference links. And today, I'm turning that nudge into more of a rugby-style shoulder barge because I know you'll be all the richer, either a little or a lot, for having watched it. If it doesn't affect you at all in any sense, I'm sending Sabarkalot around to bark in your ear at 1:30 in the morning. It's a tremendous film. It's essentially what happens when you stare into a stranger's eyes for 1 minute, 60 seconds. Such a simple idea. 100,000 people around the globe did this. And it's such a soulful, and for me at least, resonant idea, because many, many, many moons ago, and I'm talking 32 or 33 years of moons ago, I did this in a mindfulness workshop I attended. There we go, kids, mindfulness, not a new invention. The film clips that feature in this very short movie are taken from around the world, so it's a fabulous photographic project. And the question at the start of the film is, where has human connection gone? And over the next 2 minutes, 15 seconds, told you it was short, I think you find out, you see it for yourself, in a positive way. And I will say this, as politicians say when they're buying time, I will just say this. I cannot believe this film has less views than one of those ASMR films on YouTube where somebody eats spaghetti for half an hour. So be the next set of eyes and ears, and perhaps that'll help YouTube elevate it properly and have a word with itself. In terms of the staring into somebody's eyes for a minute, I remember doing this, as I say, 32, 33 years ago, and staring into the eyes. I don't think I've ever shared this. Not quite so publicly, anyway. Staring into the eyes, bizarrely, of somebody who, for reasons I'll share with you in a quiet, private moment if we're next to a bar together, who was, in essence, well, it made my life very, very difficult. I knew who he was as I stared into his eyes, but he had no idea who I was. But I can share this. I had a whole new level of empathic regard for him afterwards. That I was just not expecting. Perhaps, he says simplistically, this is how negotiations of the world stage should start. Anyway, when you've watched this film, because I know you're going to now, surely I've tempted you. Tell me at 47 seconds into the film that you don't get absolute goosebumps when the woman in Mexico finds a connection after opening her eyes. 47 seconds, pretty much exactly. Young, old, children, adults, rain, shine, sat, standing, in the cold, in the heat. The film was made in Ukraine, Puerto Rico, Northern Ireland, Spain, Germany, Brazil, Norway, Canada, all points in between. Often the intensity ends up in an embrace, a proper, big, full-on cuddle. It never feels weird. It never looks odd. The tears do flow. Sometimes foreheads come together. That's another part of connection that's so strong. It is, as I think it is, as a groom once said in a wedding that I attended. It was a one-word speech, practically, that he wrote. It is perfect. And I'd be interested to know what you think of this now, because here is a human project, a photographic project, a filming project that is award-winningly simple, beautiful, and in a world which seems to be having a slanging match with itself at the moment, it was proof that connection is still very much out there. This was like, for me, really an antidote to the news. So please, go watch this. I think you'll think it's fabulous. I'm back walking alongside my favourite canal, the Kennet and Avon Canal in Berkshire, making some sketchbook images as I go. It's a bit of a blur sky today. I was expecting a really lovely sky today. We had some beautiful weather on the way, and I was thinking, oh, a nice morning with sun streaming through the trees, but it wasn't to be. Let me just get a sketchbook picture of where I am today. next to one of the locks. Oh, I better. Something I will do is turn up the sound. I know that sounds weird. Usually, I have my sound turned right down, but shutter volume fully up. Okay, this time you can hear the shutter being pressed. 800th f3.2. Oh no, let's go 5.6. So that means the ISO will change. Oh, not too much. 200 ISO, 280 shutter speed, and there we go. Where I'm walking today. Come on, pups, this way. No, long walk today. Much to do, much to record. So let's have some short ones into the show, some short letters, then I'll introduce my guest today. Seems Complaints Corner has been tickling along nicely during my time in India. One from Chris Canham that went through the head of IT, actually, Neil Ford. I'm not quite sure why it went through head of IT. Perhaps you thought, Chris, that Neil might have the ability to send me a taser-like experience through a USB lead or something as punishment. I'm going to call this one Pantsgate. From Chris. Please ask Neil to refrain from talking about pants whilst walking around the English countryside. I can't remember which recent-ish episode it was, but it took me just a little bit too long before I realised that he actually meant trousers. One of the endearing things about the show is its Englishness, compared to the multitude of other offerings, and I'm sure those of us or them using the American land's version of English are intelligent enough to know what's what. What? Yes, what? Point made, Chris. I shall have a word with myself. I'll pull up my real English-style pants. I'll pull them up in wedgie-like fashion, just so as to remember. And some pictures for the show page today from our friend Greg Picone in the States, who sent some pictures from a creek around 100 yards behind his house in Toms Riverland, New Jersey. About 2 years ago, he says, we moved, downsized quite a bit actually. We're living in a retirement community now. My wife has renamed it Wrinkle Village. Anyway, the other day, as the winter weather is easing up here, I decided to walk down to the creek and brook behind our house. The landscape is a chaotic scene. The many storms over the decades have turned a gentle brook into a raging river many times, it seems. The trees that have not lost the battle are left holding on for dear life. A haunted woodland, for sure. And there are 3 square format, I do like a good square format picture, 3 square format pictures on the show page today from Greg that show this extraordinary landscape, a kind of mist-like feel. I'll go as far to say War of the Worlds, the latest movie, War of the Worlds kind of feel, definite aftermath kind of feel. I love in particular the tangled texture of these pictures, the trees and these wonderful roots. Oh, the exposed roots, they really do look like hands gripping the earth. I think this is a strong reminder, really, that some landscapes don't need to be grand to be profound. You just need to be in them. Anyway, pictures will be on the show page today. This week's guest, then, is Marcus Bleasdale. One of my favourite phrases, as you will know if you've listened to this show for any length of time, is every day is a school day. And this episode, this conversation today with my guest is one that contributes to that phrase, staying as one of my favoured for quite a while to come, I'm sure. Marcus is a photojournalist. Through his work in conflict zones, through the places that he travels that we wouldn't dare to tread, he invites us to look more closely at the systems that we participate in, the companies we buy from even, often unknowingly. This interview with Marcus is less about bearing witness from a distance. It's more about stepping into a kind of awareness that might change the way you think to a degree, certainly make you more aware of some of your purchasing. There's a point in our conversation where he suggests he hasn't done his job correctly because I wasn't aware just how widespread a certain problem is, and I couldn't work out if I should be ashamed that I'm clearly not as read about such important issues as I like to think I am, or perhaps by extension maybe I offended him because I really should know this kind of thing. Anyway, you'll recognise that moment when it comes up. Here's my conversation today, part 1, with Marcus Bleasdale. Come on, pups, come on.
Marcus, photography's gain is investment banking's loss. By the sound of it, we often talk on this show about a life in the arts as opposed to climbing aboard the pinstriped express of a morning. From where did your decision to depart from the 9 to 5 to where you are now? Although it probably feels many more hours than 9 to 5 as a photographer, I'm sure.
It's quite a complicated story. I was an investment banker, and I knew that I didn't want to stay there. I'd certainly got to the point in my career where I was looking for a change, and this was in the late 90s. And I'm sure you remember, I do quite vividly, during the beginning stages of the war in Kosovo.
I do. There
were several pages where people were posting. It's kind of the beginning of blogging and the internet, where we were starting to hear these first-hand accounts from people inside Pristina and inside Kosovo talking about what life was like. And I was reading those, and it really impacted me over several months. And then when I was in the bank, I was working at Bank America at the time, and I went into the office one morning, and somebody asked me, there had been a particular discovery of a massacre that morning in the newspaper. And somebody in the bank asked, what do you think that's going to do to the price of dollar mark? Kind of taken this human suffering and reduced it into an opportunity to financially benefit from the shiftings of currencies, because at that time currencies were quite linked to this conflict. It was quite proximate to Europe, and I couldn't believe it. And so I didn't even sit down. I went into my boss's office and I resigned that day. And 2 days later, I was in Pristina, and I went there not really with an idea to photograph. I took a camera with me, but I didn't really know how to use it very well. I just wanted to learn. I wanted to understand that human suffering that I'd been reading in these blogs. The Institute for War and Peace Reporting, I think, was one of them back then. And I stayed there for a year, and I volunteered for different organizations, and I took some pictures, lots of very bad pictures. And then when I came back, I did kind of understand the power of those, or power of photography at least, not necessarily my photography, but there were a lot of great photographers working out there at that time. And so I enrolled on a postgraduate program at the London College of Printing, as it was then. And I did a postgrad for a year. And that was kind of the shift, really, focusing not necessarily on the photography, but more on the kind of human condition and human rights aspect to the work that we do.
I'm intrigued by, in terms of the human story, what those around you thought of this decision at the time, because it's quite a left turn at any set of traffic lights.
It's, I think that they thought I was stupid. I think that they thought I was brave. I think that they thought I was a lot of things. But, I knew that I could not. I think what would have been brave was to stay there for another 20 years and continue on that trajectory, because, and I'm still friends with many of those people who did do that, great friends with them, and value their counsel and value their opinion. But it wasn't for me.
No.
So, I don't think it was a very brave thing to do or a very stupid thing to do. I just think it was a decision that, one can take at any stage in life. You just want to do something different, and you want to hear something and see something different.
Many photographers and journalists I've talked to about photographing in conflict or famine zones, they talk about the importance of telling the story so the world can see and the world can hear and read. But they also talk of this feeling of impotence, particularly now in a society that swipes to the next all too easily. I would imagine there is an ongoing battle internally, particularly when you look at the celebrity culture that we have and what fills the Sunday magazines now as opposed to what it did when the Balkans, when that originally was an issue.
Yeah, I mean, the days of 15 pages in a weekend magazine are long gone. But there's almost a democratization of message, though, I think. So it's not all bad, in my opinion, at least. I think swipe left or right, I don't even know which way it goes. That's how focused I am on it. But yes, it was lovely to have that long-form journalism. But there were also gatekeepers there, right? And there were some great young journalists that were never getting access to the Sunday Times magazine and the Telegraph magazine and the New York Times and the National Geographic. That these institutions at that time were hard to access, and they were for the few. And I think that the current opportunities that digital media offers are definitely a democratization of your message. And you can choose whether that's short form or long form. I think that there are viewers there for all. I mean, we're here on your podcast. It's going to be 40 minutes or an hour. There are people that want to listen for that long. And there are people that do want to see long form journalism, whether that's in the written form or in the visual form. And so, the digital media platforms allow us that access. It's our choice, right, to see and share. But also, I think it's given photographers who, I think at that time, had kind of a single track career. They took pictures. But as my career progressed, you move from taking pictures to shooting footage, to writing, to blogging, to talking about your life, having a Substack page. These are all opportunities for photographers and journalists to monetize the work that they're doing and maintain a lifestyle that, supporting their families, etc., that clearly isn't really an opportunity now with the life of a photojournalist to support 2 or 3 kids and a mortgage. That's not something that career allows you anymore.
I would imagine Ukraine is a good example here, isn't it, of local journalists and photojournalists and writers that otherwise might not have had the opportunity. I mean, parachuting in came all the famous names. I remember it right at the start of the latest conflict, the latest war. And then within a year, 2 years, okay, granted that the agencies such as NBCs or the BBCs, the ABCs, they're still there. But a lot of the photographers that originally went in weren't prepared for it to be a long tail exercise, were they? And so Ukrainian journalists and photojournalists have carried that story, as is probably correct.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to tell a story, then surely you should be telling it about your own community. And of course, many of those people that parachuted in, they're my friends. And, they did a great job, and they provided an optic that maybe a local journalist at that time wouldn't have the opportunity to get access to the distribution network that allow those images to get out.
Of course, yeah.
So they provided a service at that time, but as that war progressed and as it still progresses, the local journalists are super important. I have a great friend, Finbar O'Reilly, who's a New York Times photographer who's constantly gone back for the New York Times, to Ukraine, has had a program actually in a different country, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I've worked for many, many years. And I think through the Carmagnac Award, he used the funds to teach and mentor 4 or 5 local photographers in Congo to bring the work of those local photographers to prominence and getting them onto the World Press Masterclass and getting them published in the New York Times. So, these empowerment of local photographers is super important. But, it's also important to have those great journalists come in too. They should be working in parallel. It isn't one over the other. This isn't one better than the other. It's just a different tool. And both are extraordinarily important, I think, in the messaging.
Talking of working in parallel, we're jumping forward a bit here, and I'm going to jump back again in a moment to nearer the start of your story. But one of my greatest friends was head of PR photography for the British Army during that particular time. And I wonder what the relationship is like when you're working alongside army photographers, military photographers, how that relationship works.
Yeah, I spent most of my career in places where not many other photographers were operating. Right. I've had a few occasions where I have done that. I think in the war in Georgia, I was there in Iraq in 2003. I don't operate very well in those environments. I'm a sort of photographer that takes time, that gets to know communities, that spends time in those communities. I'm not a great news photographer. I can go in and I can tell and build long form messaging, but I'm not a great war photographer in the moment.
One of your early projects was in Sierra Leone, where you gained access to the Revolutionary United Front. I am fascinated as to how you gained trust. Tell me about that time and why this part of African history particularly fascinated you. It's quite a gruesome story, actually, in itself.
Yeah. Sierra Leone was a tough conflict. And again, that's probably a reflection of the conversation we just had. I went there on my own. There was nobody else going there.
Yeah.
We talked about studying, and I was actually still studying at that time in this postgraduate program. And And after coming back from Kosovo, and Sierra Leone was prominent in the news, but I think it dropped off the agenda in a peace deal with the rebels. And I went there for several months at the beginning and stayed in Freetown and got to know the community. And there was a horrific process that the RUF went through, which was to amputate the limbs of many of the victims there. And I think that the election slogan at the time was to raise your hand for the government. And so the RUF thought that if you chopped it off, then you wouldn't be able to raise your hand. I think that was kind of the link back then of why this was happening, at least. Anyway, to answer your question about access, again, time. I just spent time, and I was lucky enough, and also lucky enough to meet still one of my greatest friends in the business, Kadir van Loohuizen, who was the only other Western journalist in the city at the time. And both of us had been trying to get access through the office of Fodi Sanko, who was the head of the RUF at the time. And we basically combined forces. The two, we bumped into each other on the street going, what are you doing here? We got to know each other then, and we still know each other now. And we're great, great friends. Well, we decided to travel together, and that's what we did. We traveled into Koidu with a letter from Fodi Sanko to say that we had laissez-passer all the way through to Koidu. And we stayed there several days, a week, a bit more maybe. And then Kadir went home, and I then went to stay with some of the RUF who were just in that time just hanging out. And it just allowed me to gain a bit more time. And it also taught me that time, for me at least, was necessary to understand both the communities and the conflict and the nuances of those conflicts. So I spent several weeks there. And then, when I came back, as I was leaving Freetown, as it was then, bizarrely, this is when everything blew up and every single Western journalist wanted to go to Sierra Leone and Freetown, and I was leaving. And maybe it was naivety that I didn't quite get the seriousness of the issue and the time, but because I'd been in the bush for several weeks and I didn't quite understand what was going on. But essentially, I think it was the time when the British military had lost some soldiers. RUF had killed them, and British military was descending on Freetown. And I heard that they wanted to get access to the films that they knew that I'd taken. So I just got out of the country. And I took those films to Aidan Sullivan at the Sunday Times magazine at that time. And he was like, this is what we've just sent everybody out there to get. And you have it, which is the pictures of the mines, the pictures of the child soldiers, the pictures of RUF, very close proximity. Yeah. Which no one could get anymore because Koidu was off limits. No one could get out of Freetown anyway because of the security issues. And that's really, I think, what started my interest in natural resources, which continues to this day, really. It's like, how do we use conflict? How do we use natural resources to fund conflict? How do these natural resources that we all use every day, and and I'm not saying don't use them, but I'm just saying be aware of where they come from, but how do we use them in our daily life? And how does the funding from that use end up in the hands of warlords in places like Sierra Leone or Eastern Congo and fund that conflict for many, many years? So that really started that kind of link between the economics of conflict and photography and human rights. That nexus was really where I wanted to focus, and that's where I stayed focused for the next 20 years.
We've talked often about sustainability, and we're all very concerned with sustainability, as indeed we should be. But I didn't realise until I read more into what you do and your photography and your message, exactly how war and conflict, those difficulties should affect my purchasing decisions. Mm-hmm. And there were a few links to camera companies, and it was interesting to
get through.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's degrees, it seems. But that was interesting to me.
It is, and I think they say they're the worst. There is a league table that was created by the Enough Project several years ago about the use of these natural resources. And when we talk about this for your audience, we call it the 3 Ts, the tin, tantalum, and tungsten, the things that we use in our mobile phones, our computers, and any electronic product. The kind of the battery technology that we use in cars and things, then you have copper and cobalt that go into that. And that's also found in the eastern part of the DRC, more in Katanga, where there is no significant conflict yet. But, these minerals, they go into our electronic products. And of course, back when I was starting that journey, both understanding the consequence and the significance of these minerals and our relationship to them, we started talking to Apple and Intel and Dell, together with the Enough Project and together with Human Rights Watch. I was at that time working in collaboration with both of those organizations, because again, that's probably a message that these collaborations are essential as a photographer. You don't work alone. You can work with your outlet, which is the New York Times or the National Geographic or whoever. But I think it's as important, if not more important, to work with the people that open doors to policymakers, the people that open doors to that policy change, which is essentially the reason I was in photography in the first place. It wasn't to take good pictures. It was to influence policy using photography. And so that kind of link to natural resources was an important one, understanding it, first of all, and then being able to communicate to those corporations about their responsibility and use the pictures that I'd taken and the connections that were afforded by Human Rights Watch and the Enough Project, and to some extent National Geographic at that time. That allowed us that conversation. But that started back in 2001, and Intel produced their first conflict mineral-free chip in 2013. 12 years later.
Yeah.
So that's how long that time takes. Supply chains are long. They take a long time to change. And so, I think that the bigger, most well-funded corporations like Apple, Intel, Dell are pretty good actually in these areas now. They weren't great in 2001.
It's taken a while.
Definitely taken their time.
Yeah.
But they're pretty good now. And of course, it's very difficult to sometimes control these supply chains in these areas because it's very dangerous and very porous. But I think that they do the best they can. I'm not an apologist for them. They should always do better. But the camera companies don't necessarily have those funds. They don't have that firepower. And so they've kind of left it to the big tech companies to run it. And that's why they kind of end up at the bottom of the chain when it comes to league tables by the Enough Project and others.
Well, it made for very interesting reading, a reading that I was otherwise not aware of only a week ago. Well, then I haven't done my job well enough. Everybody should be aware. Well, maybe it's because the camera companies, as you say, aren't as invested in that as the Apples. I'm just going back a little bit. I'm intrigued by the if I can call it street savvy of learning how to act, how to be on the ground, how to form relationships, make contacts. I know you said that it's important to have some sort of a relationship with a larger agency to get these stories out. But I remember talking, it was quite a while ago now actually, to Jason P. Howe, who's a photojournalist. I have the greatest respect for Jason, and I don't know whether you've seen his work, but I remember a long conversation we had where he essentially learned his trade flying back and forth from Colombia. The weekends, I'm making it slightly more flippant than it was, but the weekends working for Jessop's, and then during the week across he went to Colombia. It's not quite like that, I know. But in our conversation, he did say that becoming street savvy was sometimes a trial by error of judgment. How did you fare with it? I'm sure that's something not taught on a course level.
No, it's not. And it's not something I don't think you can learn in a classroom. I think it's just, again, it's time, right? It's time and being open-minded and being a listener and being, and observing. But it's also about building networks in communities. Yeah. And that street savviness, I wouldn't say that I have it in a global sense. I say that I feel that I can do my job and be safe in certain parts of the world, right? Because of the knowledge that I have gained over many years and the networks that I've gained over those many years. But I think you can't underestimate the value of your fixer. They become central to your life. They become part of your family. They become, the main catalyst for stories. And so for me, it was about working very closely with the local community, and within the communities that I operated, then I worked very closely with people I trusted, and I did that over decades, the same people. A lot of my work in Eastern Congo, for example, can be attributed to one man, which is Pastor Marian, which is a man I met in 2002 in the town of Bunia in Ituri province. And I met him just by chance. He told me his story. We started traveling together and working together, and I was still working together with him 20 years later not 20 years later, 15 years later, just when he passed away. A group of journalists, we all supported him in his final days, and he was a significant part of our lives. And that connection and those networks and that connection to a fixer that becomes like family is pretty important. And I'm sure that all of those international and photographers that went to Ukraine would have had those people that then probably in themselves turned into journalists and photographers themselves later on. But local network is key to learning about the street and learning how to live and be safe with the work you create.
You mentioned social media a short while back. On your Instagram feed, there's a picture of a young lad pointing what looks like a machine gun at you. Forgive me, I don't know the names of all the various weaponry that unfortunately is available in the world. He's a lad in the Congo, and for sure, whilst he still has a smile on his face, and it is somewhat of a playful picture to demonstrate a more sinister underlying issue of families being pulled apart, you're never quite sure what can happen during situations like this. Or has your radar for these kind of lower to medium level dangers shifted its, forgive the pun, focus?
No, hasn't changed at all. That situation, I'll just talk about that picture for a moment, because that was a very bizarre situation. It was quite similar to the situation we're experiencing now in Eastern Congo with the M23 taking over Goma, which they've done most recently in the last few weeks. Back then, similar rebel groups were taking over different parts of Eastern Congo, and this particular group that I met was a small platoon which was made up just of children. There were maybe 15 or 20 of them in several of the shots that I have in that series. That you can see many children, still many of them in their school uniforms actually, and then with these military fatigues on over the top of it, in a town that was surrounded by another rebel group, and they were just about to attack that town. I was there with a BBC cameraman, and the two of us, we documented this situation. It wasn't low level at all. It was quite tense. Quite a lot of them were high. Quite a lot of them, their commanders were drunk. It was at a checkpoint. We were stopped and held by a group of these kids. And the child that you talk about there was more playful than the rest of the group. So, I didn't really perceive that to be a danger. Just to be clear, I was not behind that camera. I was not looking through that lens. That lens was a long way from my head over here.
Okay, so your eye wasn't to the eyepiece on that.
I was definitely not staring down the barrel of that gun. I wouldn't be that stupid. But that said, I think the strength of that image is the playfulness and the smile, because you see the child, and yet the contrast of that smile and that playfulness that we see, and I see as a parent of my 9-year-old twins now. I see that in them. And this kid wasn't that much older, maybe 11, something like that. I wouldn't imagine much older than that. And yet he was carrying a Kalashnikov. The levity of the smile changed everything. And that's kind of embedded in the power of that image, I think.
Yeah.
I tried to follow that child. We went back the next day. That town was attacked that night. And I went back the following day, and the town had been decimated. There were lots of military in the hospital. I asked for that platoon. I asked for those kids, and I was told that they were killed.
Oh.
I don't know if that's the case or not, but I have looked for that child, because it's one of those things where Tom Stoddart, I'm sure you know, he's been on this.
Yeah, I've spoken with him a number of times actually.
Tom would have followed that story until he'd found that kid. I looked and looked and looked, and I never found him. But I did hear that platoon was pretty well decimated. That's also kind of a stark reality of the situation and what these kids do.
And Marcus Bleasdale returns shortly. You'll probably hear as we make our walk today. The town gets ever closer. We're doing a long walk today, myself and Sir Barkalot, all the way into town. Go to our favourite coffee shop, where there'll be a bacon butty for me and a bit of bacon on the side for the dog. Neil, bacon on the side for the dog? I don't think so. Not a very good diet at all. Shh, you didn't hear that. Come on, pups. Don't give away our secrets. A couple of housekeeping notes about the show. If you are a Flickr user, let me guide you to a closed group our friend Kelvin Brown has made, inspired by this podcast. And I feel very flattered, Kelvin, that you should do it. Encouraging us to share photos that match the monthly assignments. There is a link to it on the show page. Also, Your comments into the show that you make on the show page are really important too. We started the show actually with one today, didn't we? And it is something that I see as soon as they're made. So don't be shy. If you feel something about a show, you want to make a comment, it's a good place to leave a short letter actually. Unless I've made the mistake called a booter trunk and trousers pants, I am nothing if not a work in progress. That is a place to leave comments for the show. Right, letters. Although actually, can I just bookmark the word privilege? Because this letter reminds me of the privilege of travel. Because being in places, and because of our cameras, and although the India specialists are come, did you go to India, Neil? You've not mentioned it. No, have I not? I have something to say following this from Randy Bullerwell about how wonderful the carnival I found was, even though mine was in Jodhpur. So firstly from Randy, who spends, this is idyllic now, he spends half his year spent in Canada, and then the other half is spent in Aruba. Hey? It doesn't get much better than that, does it? A short story and some pictures that will be on the show page from Randy so you can see and maybe even smell or touch or hear, because a good photograph enables you often to experience the scene that you're seeing in more than simply just the photographic sense. So maybe you can even hear the carnival. Dear Neil, we often talk, says Randy, about doing mini assignments with certain restrictions to just keep us photographers motivated and challenged. Well, as a means of fulfilling a strong desire to get out and photograph, my latest shoot became just that, good news. Although, firstly, he says, the bad news. After badly hurting my lower back and having to wear an awkward back brace for 3 weeks, creatively, it was a bit of a downer, but I still found myself craving a photo shoot. With Aruba's 71st Grand Carnival Parade happening at this time, I had a further creative idea. Instead of only photos, I would go and talk with a few locals who were set up along the parade route. I was hoping for and received permission to sit with them during the parade. My photographic challenge, capturing the faces of the carnival from a seated position, thanks to the back brace, using my Nikon DXVR Nikkor 18 to 140mm lens. That's almost a lot of tech there. I might have a nosebleed, Randy. Here are some pictures which, as promised, I will share on the show page today. With a celebration that lasted seven hours in sunny 36 degrees C, it was a great time had by all. Neil, please let it be known that the Aruban people are simply the best, and this truly is one happy island. Everyone, well except me, danced and sang the entire time. Amazing food, drinks to boot, and I feel I captured several fun photographs in between these happy distractions. So take care, Neil, and all the best with your own upcoming adventures. Thank you, Randy. And these, what we'll call seated portraits, will be on the show page. As for privilege, the word I used a moment ago, having attended my first true local Holi festival. Holi, Neil? Yes, Holi. You know Holi, don't you? The vibrant Hindu festival celebrating the arrival of spring, the triumph of good over evil, and the joy of human connection, marked by playfully throwing coloured powders, sometimes water, with lots of dancing in the street. That Holi, yes, that one. It's the only time in life when when you get colour bombed by strangers and you think, oh, more please, more. Anyway, if you find yourself in a photographic rut of any kind, and our letters into the show do sometimes point to that feeling that you're feeling in a photographic fug and not quite sure what to do, then festivals, like what Randy found and like what I found with Holi, they are fantastic. They have all the ingredients we quietly or not so quietly chase in our photography. Emotion and movement and story and connection, two of those words having been one-word assignments over the last 18 months or so. So with summer in the northern hem now knocking on the door, let's see your festival pictures to stories@photowalk.show. Just to tease you for the India special to come, I'll pop a couple of my own festival pictures up alongside Randy's as well. So thank you, Randy. Spare room for your next festival in Aruba, please, he says, inviting himself.
Before we return to this week's show, my thanks to those who keep us walking each week, such as our patrons, you know who you are, and now arthelper.ai for the next few months. If you've ever thought about selling your photography online but haven't a clue where to start, I think Art Helper could probably help you because it's made for people like us. Here's how it works. You upload a photo, magically and instantly professional content is made for you, such as social media posts, email newsletters, even full Substack articles, all in your own voice. It can also generate hundreds of mock-ups for every image you upload, things like your work framed so people get a real understanding of what your photograph could look like on their wall. It helps you connect with the right buyers and even suggests pricing based on your market. And unlike most AI tools, it has an art protection guarantee, which means something very important: your images are never used for AI training. Free to try, and Art Helper is giving our listeners a special deal. Go to arthelper.ai, use the code PHOTOWALK and get 30 days free of the pro version. I'll have a link on the show page. It's a great way to start selling your art or growing the business you already have. And thank you, arthelper.ai, for your belief in this show.
I can't believe as this show goes out, we are roughly 1 month away from the first Encounters 2-dayer. And some quiet planning has been going on behind the scenes. I have a surprise speaker who I'm about to announce in a moment. You're invited to step away from the screen and onto the bustling streets of London for our first one-of-a-kind 2-day non-residential photography experience designed for Photowalk podcast listeners who are passionate about making pictures. Yes, the overused P word, but I mean it. Storytelling, exploring history and connection with like-minded photographers. Connection with people you might meet on the street, and connection with the special places we're due to visit. This is very much a photographic and social experience to encourage and inspire. Excuse me while the water really flows in a second. Walking over a fast weir. Come on, pups, this way. I'm not jumping in there. Yes, this is a photographic and social experience to encourage, inspire and build upon your storytelling skills. We'll be set some surprise challenges too by established street shooters, including Joel Meyerowitz, Ed Cashy from Seven and Magnum's Mark Power. We'll have some fun learning about London's past and work as a group. And then there's the encounter itself, which could be a person you photograph, or it could be a place with a story. And I am delighted to say that the speaker I have to set the scene for the 2 days and talk about how to make stories is somebody who's been my personal mentor, somebody who you've heard on this show, somebody I refer to often, affectionately, and somebody who's told stories around the world in places like Iraq and Northern Ireland and the Balkans and all points in between, including his latest work, actually, Closer to Home, a body of work called Hometown Stories. It is, if you haven't guessed by now, Giles Penfound, who'll be mentoring us at the start of the 2 days. Giles is a documentary shooter who for many years headed up the British Army's photography PR internationally. And I've been fortunate for nigh on 2 decades to have him mentor me personally, although I'm not sure that he knew at times that was what he was actually doing. We'll work through our wonderful challenges together, developing or learning new skills, stepping beyond the recognised format of street photography workshops, because we'll be creating a zine and a podcast feature from this special 2 days together. Now, we do have a space still available on Encounters London, and I know some folk like to leave things to the last minute to make sure they're free. So if you are, the dates are Thursday and Friday, Thursday 24th and Friday 25th of April. Go to the website, photowalk.show, look for the Encounters tab in the menu, bring the camera, I'll supply the coffees, experience, challenges and Giles. And I said we'd be getting a little bit more industrial with the noise as we walked along this path. Listen to that. It's destroying the background of the beautiful bird song that I had but moments ago. Come on, pups. Let's fast forward our feet. All 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, of course, 6 of them through this stretch. Come on. That's better. It's not quite gone, the noise. If I hold the microphone in the air, there's the remnants of the industrial hum, but we're through it. It's the photo walk of a Friday. Thank you for making time to walk with me. I know it's a bit of a different podcast. I had some feedback recently that said once you get past all the waffle, it's probably worth listening to. I thought, I don't know whether you're really understanding the idea of a longer tail, gentle themed or gentle paced podcast, not necessarily themed, obviously, when you consider some of the topics that we are proud to cover. Right, the one word assignment now, because we're clinging to the month by the coattails, it being the 28th, on the day of release anyway. This month is from Claire Thomas. I know that we've featured this toward the start of the show, but this is the official place, and actually there's a couple more bits bolted to it, which make it which make it right. Perhaps that's the better word for doing now as well, a sort of repeat if you like. So, humanity from Claire. Humanity is the word this month. Find humanity in a photograph, which, as Claire said, can be shown a number of ways. It could be a compassionate, emotional moment with family members, or perhaps with an animal, a pet. It might be a self-portrait, a picture that shows your humanity, a moment of self-reflection, perhaps, question mark. One of the things that Claire said she's really drawn to is hands. For this, to quote Claire, I feel like hands tell an extraordinary story of a person and humanity. You can tell a lot about somebody and what they've lived through by their hands. It's a theme that we've covered a few times, I know, and I agree wholeheartedly with Claire. And I remember taking those thoughts actually to, did I tell you I've been to India? I'm not sure I did. A couple of weeks ago, spending one morning on a particular street, looking at the hands of the people I'd otherwise be trying to tell a story about with their faces, their expressions. Street barbers in particular seem to be a theme of many of my photographs on the street. And spoiler alert, for those coming on the first Encounters workshop in April, you may find, hint, that becomes one of the encounters we'll be making, not the street barbers, the hands. I'll come back to hands in a moment. So it's open to much interpretation, this challenge, as many are. Many nuances to this one. Best of luck. Send your pictures to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. If you can resize them to 2,500 pixels wide, you're an absolute star. If you can't, don't worry. Send me the full res and I'll do the heavy lifting. Now, to go with the assignment this month, I'd like to mention 2 pictures, and I've popped them onto the show page as well as the assignments page. I had the most wonderful, and we mentioned the words self-portrait just a moment ago. I had the most wonderful self-portrait entered by Jerilyn Owen, along with the following words which may provide some inspiration. Unfiltered Me is the title of this picture, said Jerilyn. Accepting and loving me at 55. Embracing the Arctic blonde hair that I've fought for too many years to admit to, accepting that my lines show the joy and sorrows I've lived. The baggy eyelids are a reminder that I am my Grandpa Baker's granddaughter, that the lines under my eyes match my mom's along with my blue colour. The scar on my neck reminds me that my work here wasn't done yet and I have a lot more to do. And that the smile is the love that I have for who I am as I turn 55. And then on the topic of hands, Samantha Ramsay sent in a picture of hands in reference to humanity, which also had a link to something that she wrote about hands, which is on Sam's website. And I just wanted to read a shortish excerpt, although it's perhaps almost all the piece that she wrote, but allow me this. We talk often about writing and photography as a partnership, and actually, again, this is very much part of our Encounters workshop. From Sam, have you ever looked at your hands and remembered? A memory comes unbidden, a time of youth, a mind full of inconceivable dreams, hanging from a fence. What a story, that scar. So many moments catching fire, dappled and dimpled, speckled skin, ellipses and punctuations, blisters and calluses. Writ through with slashes of hardened white, bookending a tale of spinning metal, tearing, coloured in bright red, spilling. A gleam, small but bold, golden palm to palm, love to the moon and back. I have a thing for hands. They hold the nothings and the entirities. They hold my everything and my nothings and my evermores. Sam, that's a wonderful piece of writing to go with your pictures, or your picture rather, of hands. It really is. Fantastic. Send me your assignment pictures over the next week then, and thank you, Jerilyn, for your thoughts that went with your picture, that precious self-portrait, and indeed to Sam. So to the concluding part of my conversation today with a very special photographer, and I do believe I hint to him that there is so much more ground for us to cover in a future conversation. Here is part 2 of my chat with Marcus Bleasdale.
I'd like to start part 2 of our conversation by asking how you, Marcus, as a human, photographing human conditions, human stories, how you cope, how it affects your own humanity, seeing what you see. Is there a strategy for making pictures like this on a mental level? How do you cope?
I don't think you do cope. I think you hold it. It stays with you. You know, that child is as vivid in my mind as it was the day I took that image, and it very rarely, you know, he comes back in my head quite regularly, as do many other situations, similar situations. So I don't think dealing with it is the right phrase. I think you manage it, right? But it does take. I think each one of those kind of places a slight weight upon you. And you carry that weight, and over your career, maybe these weights start to become heavier and heavier because you've got quite a few of them. And so, you know, I'm quite open that I've had PTSD. I suffer from PTSD. I've had, especially from the experiences that I've had in Central African Republic, you know, those experiences really affected me, and they affected my family deeply. And I still carry that with me now. And I've had treatment for it. You know, I've taken time out. I've not been traveling to conflict zones like Congo and Central African Republic as a result for many months. You know, I've taken time off my career to manage my way through it. And I'm lucky because I can get access to that sort of treatment. The people that I photograph and spend time with can't get that chance to leave. But so I don't think you deal with it. I think you carry it. And you carry it for a long time.
You work regularly with Human Rights Watch, UNICEF, Médecins Sans Frontières, and other NGOs to highlight health and human rights issues, as we've talked about. And whilst I there's an importance of these organisations, I'm not trying to make this a political debate. That's why I'm dancing a bit now in my sentence. But I wouldn't be doing my job without pointing toward what could be a shift in the political dialogue at the moment when it comes to funding aid and directing aid. It's my way really of pointing toward the change of policy in America for agencies like USAID. As a photographer, surely these sort of things concern you because you really see at the sharp end how much difference these agencies can truly make to human beings.
I mean, I was about to say it's uncalculable, but it is calculable. You can actually put dollars and cents on the difference that these organizations make. They save millions of lives. They have saved millions of lives. And the organizations that now have had their funds withdrawn will be impacted by those lack of funds, hopefully there will be other organizations that will step into that. And another part of my life is to run one of those organizations, to look for those sorts of funds and allocate that sort of capital to these needy communities. So, I'm quite lucky now. I'm getting a lot of calls from different organizations saying, we have lots of organizations that have lost their funding from USAID. Is there an opportunity to speak to you or your network to try to find some funds to replace it? So, it is, you can't underestimate the value that an organization like the USAID has had. And, we're talking today when Keir Starmer has just announced a massive increase in defense spending at the cost of foreign aid in the UK, right? So that's today. And I can understand why, again, to use your words, not getting political, I can understand why certain political organizations, and at this time, to support the European community and to support the defense of Europe and also to support our friends in Ukraine, why we do have to make these difficult decisions. The ones in the US are slightly more politically levered. I'm not saying that the USAID is perfect at all. There was an enormous amount of problem in terms of funding, misallocated funding, too much funding, leakage, corruption, whatever you want to say. I'm sure there were challenges with the institution itself that could and should have been dealt with, but to cut it off at its roots isn't the right way to do that, because that will have consequences. Whether that USAID funding is supporting prison guards in Syria that are guarding 2,000 ISIS prisoners and are now not getting paid. Do you really want those 2,000 ISIS prisoners not to have the right guards in that prison so that their security is challenged and that they could end up in communities and end up in rebel terrorist groups around the world again? Those can be the consequences of these decisions, and it's been done with such lack of thought and planning that it can't only be that there isn't. I think we will look back in several years and try to be able to assess the challenge and damage that it has done to these communities. I'm not saying these organizations were perfect, but I'm saying that they did great work.
When you do exhibits at places like the United States Senate, the US House of Representatives, the United Nations, Houses of Parliament, not to mention the International Criminal, well, I will mention it, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, behemoth organisations and places with lots of very important people. What is the feedback? Because this is where you want your work to be seen. This is where you can make real difference if only those in the pinstripes are looking at the pictures and taking on board the message.
They're important places to show work, I think, period. These are policymakers, and these policymakers do care, many of them. The Senate and Congress, that was championed by Senator Clinton at the time, Hillary Clinton, and her work and her voice around sexual violence in the eastern parts of the DRC was very powerful and was significant in pushing forward the then Dodd-Frank Act that was enabled in the US. So these opportunities do change laws and change policy. I'm not saying that I did that as a photographer. I'm saying in collaboration with organizations like Human Rights Watch and the Enough Project, with their amplification of maybe the images that we take and the messages that we bring back. They're the ones that push the policymakers to make these changes. And it's so important to be in those spaces, whether, that's the Houses of Parliament, the International Criminal Court, to have your work used as evidence in a war crimes tribunal is shocking. But I think you feel as if it becomes that the point of your work is kind of validated when you know that it's holding warlords to account,
very much,
and holding people who have committed significant atrocities against humanity to be held to account in a place like the International Criminal Court. So there is a certain sadness to it, but there's also a level of pride to the fact that the work can be used in that way.
Well, talking of pride, you received a CMG from the Palace in 2023. That must have been. I should mention your Kappa gold medal as well, within the same sentence, clearly. But
which one means more?
No, I would never be so crass as to ask that question. But this recognition, I think it must be important. I know that you don't work for the recognition of medals in that respect, I'm sure. But to have your family see it, to have the people that you work with, to have the fixers see it, to see your work being rewarded in that way, I think that must be very important, and you must be extremely proud of that as well.
Yeah, my mum was proud. I took my mum.
Good. I think I saw your children there as well, weren't they? In the photograph, were your children there?
Yeah, that was a lovely little story, actually, because they don't allow kids, the kids of my kids' age in there. And I was being dropped off by them in the morning to go into it was at Windsor Castle, actually, and a fantastic security guard, maybe I shouldn't say this, I'll get him into trouble. A fantastic security guard said, "Oh, are those your kids?" And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Well, what?" He's funny. He said, "Well, what are you in for?" And I was like, "I'm going CMG." He said, "Oh, you'll be out early then." And he said, "Well, tell them to come here at 12 o'clock and tell them to put on a nice frock, and I'll let them in, and you can take a picture inside the castle."
Oh, wonderful!
And so, as I came out of the castle, he nodded to them and let them in, and we could have 5 minutes in front of the chapel there to take some nice pictures with the whole family, because they weren't all allowed in. Yeah. So that was a nice little kind of side. But it means a lot. It meant a lot to me to share that moment with my mom, because we maybe don't understand what we put our loved ones through when we make these decisions to have a career like this. And I know that I have challenged her sleep and her sanity sometimes in the decades that I've been doing this. So it was nice for her to experience that a little bit. Yeah. But as you say, taking this back to organizations like Human Rights Watch and the Enough Project and Pastor Marion's family, and the organizations that I've supported in Eastern DRC and other places, it's important for them to see that people recognize the challenges that they've been going through too.
Very much. You've published 3 books. This is usually where a guest says, no, there's 5, but I counted 3. Do you mind focusing a little on each? It seems like a lazy way of asking a question, but it's a good way to draw some focus on these particular books. Let's start with 100 Years of Darkness.
That book it's an important book for me, but let's address it, because it addressed a particular time in the history of DRC's kind of political change. It was post Mobutu time, when it was really difficult to use cameras in DRC. I got arrested quite a lot. Oh. During the years that I was documenting that period for that book. And, I was also at the time, as many probably have done, taking literature with me on these long, dark nights, traveling the River Congo for several months, which, essentially is what I did for that book. You're on your own a lot. And so I was traveling with Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's book, challenge it for its colonialism and its view of the world at that time. I think those challenges are fair, but also you can't undervalue its contribution to literature. At the time it was published and since. And so I was reading it and I was touched by it, but I was touched by the similarity, actually, because I was reading this account that was taken 100, quite literally. That's why the title is there, 100 Years of Darkness, 100 years before I was traveling there, and things hadn't changed at all. And so that, I just read these words and put those 2 experiences together and felt that it was kind of a valid way of telling that story. But I think that work, if I kind of reflecting, I think photographers would never stop doing that. If I reflect on that work, I think the message is a good one. But I think that the work was more about me than the places I was documenting. I think it was about me finding a place and a space.
Right.
And I think that if I kind of look at that work, critically, I think that was definitely a work of a photographer trying to find out who he was.
Interesting.
I think if you go to the next book, which is The Rape of a Nation.
Rape of a Nation. Well, this one obviously addresses something we've talked about within the conversation about this exploitation of natural resources in Eastern Congo.
Yeah, that work I think is definitely a step in a different direction, and hopefully tries to challenge you, the reader, to what you know and what you understand. I think it's about trying to challenge the status quo. It's trying to challenge industry. It's trying to share stories from the people that I met along the way, not just me, but other researchers from the Human Rights Watch and the Enough Project shared their stories as well. So, if you're kind of critically analyzing the work, I think that body of work is more trying to challenge you. And I think I did my job a little better with that book than maybe the first one.
And then the most recent, 2015, The Unravelling.
Yeah, that was a hard few years to document that conflict. I did that work together with Human Rights Watch and the head of the emergency team at Human Rights Watch, Peter Bouckaert, who ironically has just WhatsApped me as we're having this conversation. He's in Ukraine right now.
Right.
And that was a really tough document to make because of the brutality of that conflict, because of the proximity of that brutality. Whilst I wasn't there during the genocide in Rwanda in 94, I suspect it felt similar. The proximity of those killings we were experiencing, it was just right in front of us. Many times in the morning, we witnessed people being killed for several days. And that, we talked about PTSD before, and that experience really did put a lot of weight on me, and it took some time to recover from it. But that book, maybe it's a little less eloquent visually, but it's an important book because for me it's a document of a war crime, and sometimes that's not pretty. And in fact, quite a lot of that work was used in the International Criminal Court. That book was used. That many of those images were used as evidence against anti-Balaka defendants in the International Criminal Court.
Well, on that note, there's a quote here from you, which I think is quite important. I think pictures can scare people away and repulse people. What I try to do is draw people in through beauty in a way. Are you consciously working with that thought, even at the times where you are genuinely, really repulsed by a moment?
No, I think there are times when you have the space to think about how can I make this particular moment something that is visually stimulating.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that with the challenge that some of those images portray, which is, people's lives being lost, that you document it. You just document it. But there is, that's the benefit of having the ability of long form journalism. There are times when you can think about narrative, and I think about photography a little bit like a novel, right? We need relationships, we need love, we need to be introduced to characters, we need landscapes and senses of place, we need very tight stories around the kitchen table, and we need stories walking down a lane in the farm. And so I think of photography very similarly, that we're creating a narrative, and so there are spaces for that beauty and that love and those relationships. And that's where you think maybe about drawing people in with that kind of visual narrative. And then there's the horror, and then there's the tough story, and that you just tell it how it is.
Well, there's such a depth to your work. I feel like we've touched on one particular side of it, but the last of the Viking whalers, China in the internet revolution. I almost want to say softer stories, but they're not necessarily softer in that respect. But they're probably all interviews in their own right, so I sincerely hope you may return to talk about them another day with me, I hope. But in the meantime, I have a question that ends every interview, which I'm fascinated to know what you're going to say. I doubt for one moment you've ever thought, I wonder what life would have been like had I carried on walking into that particular large set of oak doors that I imagine all investment banks have. But what is your why? What makes you do this now? Has it changed? What is your why?
Yeah, I've said this quite a few times. I'm not a photographer that focuses so much on the photograph. It's not it's not about creating an image or a visual image. It's about finding what an image can do and how you can take, so that, once the image is taken, and forgive me if I'm kind of saying something I've said before elsewhere, but that for me is the beginning of the story. That's the beginning of how you use that picture. It isn't what, I've taken a great picture, 60th of a second, great, what an accomplishment, we're done. It isn't. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of a conversation with communities, policymakers, at the beginning of a conversation with aid agencies and advocacy groups to be able to empower people to change the way we think and change the way we act as communities. And so the why is, how can we use it, right? We have these pictures, how can we use them? How can we change our world for the better as a result of the things that we have created with photography? My experience has changed as I've become a parent, and I'm sure yours has too, right? You change, right? Yeah. And your ability to take risk has changed. My ability to take risk has changed for sure. I was covering the Central African Republic in 2018, I think, for National Geographic magazine. And I was in a very challenged situation. We were being shot at, by a particular rebel group. I was just like, my kids are 2 years old. What am I doing? Why am I here? You asked for the why. Why am I here? Somebody else should be here. I have got 2-year-old kids, and I want to be there when they're 22.
Well, how did you resolve it that day?
I mean, as these things generally get resolved, the rebel group goes away and the shooting goes down and you get out of the place and you go home. But it did leave a scar in that, I do not want to put myself in that situation anymore. No. I did it for 20-something years, on the edge of, on the front line and documenting conflict. And I found, how can I have impact, the same amount of impact that I potentially could have documenting these lives on the front lines? How can I still have that impact, but maybe drop my kids off at school a little bit more frequently and put them to bed a little bit more frequently? So that, that's also been a question as a parent and a photographer. How do we do that, right? And how do we balance parenthood and our need to create change? It's also a bit of a challenge, I think.
Thank you, Marcus. What a privilege to talk with you, and I do hope that you'll return and speak to us again about a myriad of other photographic projects you've worked on. His work is moving beyond much of what I've seen of late, and especially so now that I've some stories to accompany the still photographs I've witnessed through being absolutely immersed in his work over the last few weeks in particular. And that's it for today. If you can't wait until next Friday and you want to walk a little further together, then the Extra Mile edition number 132 is waiting for you. It's our extra show for those who support this podcast through Patreon. You go the extra mile for me, so I go the extra mile for you. I will say this, for obvious reasons. Our patrons are now becoming you've always been very important in terms of the support for the show, but even more so now in allowing me to do what I can do with this podcast and take you with me along the path. 10% of those who download and listen to this show are patrons, 10, which I'm very proud of. 20% would make this show able to support itself financially fully. This week, I am joined by Marcus once more for 3 more questions that we call 3 More Stops, which is a new feature as we head into spring. One of which, the questions will be advice Marcus has for photographing life, and also a forthcoming guest features on this Extra Mile called Lee Nordby from Canada, who makes the most extraordinary photographs of and in nature, immersed in nature actually. And here's a taster of what's waiting for you right now.
On this week's Extra Mile.
And I was an accountant, and I enjoyed accountancy, and don't get me wrong, I had some passion along the way in what I did in helping people. It was always about helping people. Yeah. But my true excitement, and my family and my wife have noticed a huge difference in me since I've put the photographer hat on and the artist hat on. I'm a completely different person. Yes. And I'm not that I would go into a corporate world and advocate people quit and go pursue their passion, but it's the importance of enjoying what you're doing. Because if you really enjoy what you're doing, you will be so much better at it. And it's about connecting, about, finding the relief from the stresses of the corporate world by spending some time in nature.
Our PS to the show is to come, but before that, we need a play-out song just to make some final frames too, or think about what's been said today. I needed something thoughtful, really, something reasonably reflective today as we make our last few pictures together for the show along the paths that we're walking. And I've chosen an artist who I really enjoy called Space Doves. This song is called Free Heart Odyssey.
And I know I can stay. Cause my heart was meant to be free. And those fences are all surrounding me. And I want to go far. Just as far as I can be. Till the ocean will feel the ocean in me. Through the shadows of the open sea, waves will shake the and I know you will wait. You will wait for my return. We're together, just two big drops of rain. Through the shadows of the open sea, waves will shake slowly. I will follow. And I know I can stay. Cause my heart was meant to be free.
That's Free Heart Odyssey by Space Doves. And that's it really for this week. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS. My sincere thanks to you. If you are or you're about to become an extra miler, we have now crossed. I don't mind telling you this. I know some people have thousands and thousands, and some people keep it a bit secret, but we've now crossed this week, the last few days, 400 patrons, 400 people that really believe and support the podcast. That gives you a clue how many listen to the show each week. Neil, I could do my maths, or me math, I know. We'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together, a safe place to share our thoughts about this thing we do, photographing and walking. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members, plus Michael Mixon, who's pulled up a chair at the research table. Thank you, Michael, for your work on our interviews, researching and doing extra research into our guests. Write a postscript for the show. I am breaking completely with tradition and choosing 3, which I have done once or twice before, I know. There's a PS, a PPS, and a PPPS. Now, at the very start of the show, I talked about a film Spike Boydell had sent in about human connection. I think I probably shared my passion for the film, didn't I? And even though I've essentially told you what occurs in this short film about what happens when two strangers lock eyes, I don't think I've given it a complete spoiler. Don't think I've ruined it, because this is one of those occasions where you need to see it. One of those times when it's not necessarily the fact that radio paints better pictures. Anyway, there is a quote at the end of the film which I think is the perfect postscript to the show today, particularly after some of the stories shared by my guest Marcus Bleasdale. It's a closing slide, and I think it says everything about how important photography can be when it becomes part of a way to connect. And it's this: true connection is our pathway to peace, which I love very much as a PS. Come on, pups, this way. So that alone could be perfect. But Marcus mentioned Joseph Conrad in our conversation today, and I did some research for a PS, and I came away with two. The first is about travel, and travel is a real part of this show with many of our guests and letters. This is often, this PPS, attributed to Marcel Proust, but a sentiment Conrad echoed throughout his work. He said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And I thought that could be particularly potent in our photography language. And here's one, this is the PPPS, this is the last bit, from Joseph Conrad, from Heart of Darkness. "We live in the flicker. May it last as long as the old earth keeps rolling. But darkness was here yesterday."
The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.